learn, I guess. Also, for the people, I mean, if you're asking questions, you're going to be recorded. Yeah. So let me try to see how to share the screen. Can you see the slides? Okay. Of course, I'll not be able to see the chat. Okay. Yes, I'll not be able to see the chat. So either maybe I actually can. Let me try to do this. Okay. All right. Okay, so welcome to the deep learning course in physics. Yeah, so generally I would suggest that we start always quarter past, and then we'll run until 1:45. So that's usually the plan, and yes, so you can arrive 50 minutes late. Okay, so let me try to get started. So welcome. So today we're gonna do we're gonna go through some administrative details and kind of discuss some goals for the course. We'll also discuss which course is suitable for which background, and then we'll also go through a bit of motivation and background why we're doing this course. Okay, so just a few words on myself. So I'm a new professor here at TUM. I'm a particle physicist, and so I have a professorship that's focused on data science and physics. So I came here in March, and so before I was 10 years working at CERN, which is a particle accelerator in Geneva. I'll talk about this in a bit. But here in Munich, I'm now part of the Origins Cluster of Excellence. It's a kind of a big cluster that tries to kind of figure out what the origins of the life and the origins of the universe is. And inside of Origins, we have the Origins Data Science Lab, which we also coordinate, where we kind of research data science related topics that are related to our physics research. And then there's also the Munich Data Science Institute, where I'm also involved. So if you're interested in data science or have questions on data science in general, or you're looking for master's thesis and so on, feel free to get in touch. Okay, so where are we kind of physically located? So as I said, we had a short switch in rooms, but so we're on the IPP campus. It's right at the south entry of the U-Bahn, and so you can walk over. And so our office is there. If you have any questions, you can either email us or you can come by, in person. Yeah, so as I said, I'm interested in data science, but my kind of physics background is I'm a particle physicist, and I work at the Large Hadron Collider. It's the world's most powerful particle accelerator. It's located in Geneva, Switzerland. So you can see it's a very large tunnel. It's 100 meters underground, 27 kilometers in circumference. And basically what we do here is we accelerate particle beams, protons. One beam goes clockwise, the other one goes counterclockwise, and we accelerate them to almost the speed of light. And the thing that we do there is basically we let them kind of smash into each other at these four locations. And so I personally work with my group on the Atlas experiment, which of course is the best experiment in this entire construction. And so there is Jonas, who's a postdoc that is working with me. And so there we were trying to kind of find out, what the core constituents of matter are. Here you can see kind of like a diagram. So okay, now you can't see it, but okay. So I don't see my mouse, so I cannot figure this out. But you can see kind of in the tunnel we have very strong magnets that are able to bend the particle beams, even though they're very highly energetic, into the circular shape. All right, so then what do these experiments look like? So this is the Atlas experiment. It's one of the most complicated kind of experimental apparatuses mankind has ever built. And so here you can see like a person as a size comparison. It basically acts like a three-dimensional camera that tries to take a three-dimensional image of what is happening during these collisions, which happen 40 million times a second. And generally, if you look at it as a camera, it has 100 million sensors. So you can imagine there's a lot of data that is kind of being captured if you have 40 million collisions per second, and you have 100 million signals for every collision. Okay, so how much data is there actually being produced? So we have like a raw data stream of over a petabit per second, which is a bit mind-blowing, but of course we cannot save all of this to disks. We just don't have enough storage capacity, and so we need to filter down online to something like terabits per second first, and then we filter online further to a gigabit per second, and then we are writing out something like a few gigabytes per second, but 365 days a year. So there's lots of data that is happening, and so generally across all the different experiments and between simulation and data at the LHC, we have collected over an exabyte of data over the last decade or so. And so you can imagine, you hear in the news, machine learning is really driven by the availability of lots of data, and so particle physics is really kind of like a paradise for machine learning. So that's why also I personally kind of pivoted a bit into my interest in data science. Okay, so what you might also know is that CERN is not only known for particle physics, but it's also where the World Wide Web was born in the early 90s. This is Tim Berners-Lee. This is one of the first servers of the World Wide Web. And so he kind of proposed, like a mechanism to share information across the internet. And so if you looked up on your phone, like in your browser, how to get here today, you're like a beneficiary of fundamental particle physics research. And so that was in the early 90s, and ever since, okay, we haven't looked back. Everybody's using the World Wide Web, of course. Okay, so then I wanted to contextualize a little bit kind of what the course is about. So what we're trying to do is, now that I arrived here at the Tom Physics department, we're trying to build up like a bit of a data science curriculum. And so that includes various types of formats. So we have the lectures with exercises. So this is what you're sitting in right now. And we have various lectures. And so I know there's a little bit of overlap what lectures you signed up for. So I don't know, maybe a show of hands who signed up for multiple. After this lecture, and so you can join there as well. It's not kind of signed up into online for credit. Maybe that can be changed. And then in the Munich area, there's lots of activity on kind of machine learning, and especially on the intersection between science and machine learning. And one of the very nice seminar series is the Physics Meets Machine Learning, which is organized by the LMU. Okay, so so that's what we have during the semester. We also have stuff that's happening outside of the semester, and there we have block courses. So if you're kind of busy during the semester, you have other stuff to do, but you still want to do machine learning or statistics, you can kind of take an intensive summer course on different topics. So we, for example, have a block course on probabilistic reasoning. So this is Bayesian statistics or frequentist statistics, how you actually, produce a scientific result when you take a measurement. And then we also have a machine learning blog post, which we just had a couple of weeks ago. And so if you have other ideas what you want to do, you can just talk to us, and maybe we can create a blog course for this as well. Yeah. So the blog courses are 2 weeks generally, but there's like 3 weeks, 3 days per week lectures, and then we have exercises associated to it. But so we have 3 days of lectures 1 week, and then the 3 days of lectures the other week. Yeah. Yeah, so the machine learning one, so this was machine learning and deep learning. Yeah. So it's kind of like the 1 week compressed the essential for machine learning and 1 week compressed the deep learning course. So for the next semester break, we don't have the dates yet, but if you're interested, you can we can notify you if you want to take the next semester break. Yeah, so you also receive credit points as well. No, it's I think it's also 5. Yeah. Any other questions? Okay. All right. So then the question is, okay, which course should you be taking? So the way to do it is to use a machine learning method called the decision tree. And so the first question you should ask yourself, okay, are you familiar with Python or with the, some introductory statistics? So does this thing on the right, ring a bell? Was it familiar? Have you seen like expectation values of functions? So this is also something that you might have discussed in the quantum mechanics lecture. And then, so that's kind of on the theoretical side, kind of like a little bit of statistics. And on the left-hand side, if you're know Python and you can kind of do like a scatter plot, or you can do a histogram and plot a function in Python. Then that's already good. If you are not familiar, which is fine, then I would recommend that you go to the essential machine learning lecture, because these types of techniques on data visualization with Python and so on are going to be discussed there. It's kind of like an introductory course into machine learning if you weren't exposed to these concepts yet. If you are familiar with these things, then there's a next question that you should be asking. Are you already familiar with deep learning? Might be that you already either you do it kind of as a hobby, or you have seen it in a different course and so on, or you were in the informatics department. Then so like these logos ring a bell: PyTorch, TensorFlow. If like you can read this code and kind of understand what's going on. So this is the code that's trains the neural network. So if this is stuff that you've done already, then you probably don't need this course. And then I would suggest that you come to the data science seminar. So if you're not familiar with this, you should stay here, because this is exactly what we're going to discuss. And if you are familiar with this, you can come to us to the data science seminar, which is Wednesdays from 4 to 6. And the topic that we're discussing there right now is simulation-based inference, which is a particular combination between machine learning and scientific simulators. Okay, so let me see. Yeah, so the goals that I have for this course is you should basically have like a broad overview of what's happening in machine learning. Everybody reads in the news about like AI and like these kinds of things, and it's hard to kind of understand really what's happening and how it's relevant to your own research. So you should understand why this is happening now. What it can do for you, what it cannot do for you. You should gain some hands-on experience in training deep neural networks. So at the end of the course, you should be fairly confident in training neural networks. And you should understand kind of some key architecture choices, how to match the neural network architecture to like the specific data modality, for example, that you have. If you're working with images, there's a certain kind of neural network that you're using with this. If you're using time series, there's a different kind of neural network, and so on. And then I'll also, as I'm going through these different topics, I'll also try to highlight some applications in physics, because after all, it's not a course in the informatics department, but in the physics department. Okay, so then some course details. So as we discussed, so this is 5 ECTS credits. It's 2 hours of lecture Fridays. As I said, we will start 15 minutes after noon at this location here. And then we'll also have 2 hours of tutorial on Mondays between 10 and 12. And so one of the things that weren't super sure of is how many people are planning to come to the tutorials, because as we've seen, there is a bit of overlap, and people might decide differently which course they're going to attend. So who knows already that they're going to definitely come to the tutorial? Okay, 3, 4. Okay. So then, so I would suggest you come to the tutorials, because if you want to get like hands-on experience in training neural networks, we're not going to do this in the lecture. But of course, you know, it's up to you. So we would meet Monday. It seems like at this level, we can probably take whatever room I already booked, because there are 20 seats there. Okay, perfect. In terms of people, so that's my professional picture on the right-hand side. I don't actually look like this, but okay. So I'm gonna do the lectures and the tutorials, and then Jonas, who's here, he's gonna do the tutorials, and we'll basically be guiding you through these topics. In terms of communication, so we have emails. So you can write us a question that you have. We also have a Discord server that we set up so that we can kind of communicate asynchronously. If you have some questions in terms of, you know, how to do something coding wise, I'll have it open, and then Jonas will have it open. We can discuss, or you can also discuss maybe amongst yourself. And so let's see how it goes. Basically, it's just like an offering to you. Whether or not these types of communication methods work usually depends on the students, right? So if there's nobody writing anything there, it's just going to be empty. All right. So grading. Yeah, so there's going to be an oral exam, something like 20 minutes. The type of questions, I'm not going to ask you like super detailed mathematical derivations and so on. So the goal is to really kind of test some broad conceptual understanding on, you know, what's happening with deep learning. And like an example question would be, okay, why do we add nonlinearities to neural networks? So in the way that we construct neural networks, there's always like different things that different building blocks, and they usually have like a reason to be there. And so these type of questions might come up in a oral exam. All right, so then rough outline. So today I'm going to give a bit of intro motivation. Next week we're going to talk a bit about like learning theory. What does it actually mean to learn, and what is machine learning generally? Then we'll talk a bit about like why deep learning and so on. And then we'll like slowly go through how we train neural networks. We'll take the most basic neural network architecture, the multi-layer perceptron, and train it. We'll talk about you know, optimization techniques and you know, how to you know, implement them in code. We'll discuss a bit deep learning frameworks, and then we'll basically discuss two branches of types of neural networks, which is generative models and inference engines. And then there are different kinds of neural networks for there. So there are convolutional neural networks, graph neural networks, recurrent neural networks. So you might have heard these terms. If you don't know what these are, you know, the course is here to basically teach you that. And then on the generative side, so if you've seen in the news, things are generating images from text and so on. So these are generative models. And so we'll discuss some of these here, and hopefully it will shed a little bit of light into you know, how these things work. Okay, so in terms of material, I'll not be following like any particular book. But there are a few suggestions for very nice resources. So there's a very nice book by Murphy called Probabilistic Machine Learning, which I would suggest. And then if you're more kind of coding interested, there's a very nice like online textbook called Dive into Deep Learning or D2L.ai. And so there are very, very detailed tutorials and explanations how things work. And so I would kind of write this down, and this is a great resource. Okay, so that was kind of the administrative part, and there's some time for questions. Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, so for the tutorials, we'll probably not have like homework necessarily, but we'll prepare some Jupyter notebooks that we'll kind of work through during the session, right? And so if we run out of time, or we realize that the tutorial time slot is a little bit too short, we might do a homework kind of for your own benefit, and then you can also kind of discuss with us on the Discord server. But the baseline assumption is that we're going to do this kind of in person amongst ourselves. Yeah. So does anybody have not have like a notebook with the Python installed? Okay. Everybody has a notebook with Python installed? Who has a notebook with Python installed? Okay, great. Okay, awesome. So then, any other questions? Yeah.
Is there some sort of model course where you're going to talk about the recording?
Yeah, so since I also only arrived here recently, I need to find these things out. But so these slides exist, and so I'll try to upload them. And the recording should also be in the cloud. So after this lecture, I'll try to figure out how to do these things, and then I'll send an email around. Yeah. So we'll have recordings on the slides. Yeah. Any other question? Okay. All right. So then we can get started. Let's talk a little bit about like artificial intelligence and these things. If you're reading the news or you're kind of seeing what's going on in the world, you might have seen articles like this, in the German news, whether or not like machines are sentient. There's a lot of talk about like artificial intelligence. The German government is investing a lot into artificial intelligence. It's a big topic, and usually it's somehow accompanied by pictures of little robots or crazy people in the Matrix. And so it's clear something is happening. So but it's important to understand like what exactly is what, and what do people mean with artificial intelligence. And so the starting point of this is basically, okay, it's kind of key part of our human nature that we're tool builders. Our forefathers, they kind of managed to build like some interesting tools. For example, you can kind of be much more efficient in getting water out of the river instead of like having buckets, or you have like something that helps you carry the buckets. So building tools that do something that we might maybe do ourselves, but we want the machine to do for us, is kind of part of our kind of core human nature. And so artificial intelligence is kind of the long-term vision of that. Also one thing that we kind of tend to do as humans is also that we try to mimic nature. We see something that people outside, maybe we're not only want to mimic ourselves, but we see something in nature where that seems like a cool capability. We should maybe also have this. And so people saw birds flying, and then we had humans trying to have human flight and so on, not so long ago, actually, not even 150 years ago. And so these things can have quite a big impact on the way that we live our lives. So if you look, for example, in the sky or like a flight tracker, like the sky looks something like this, and like 100 years ago we didn't fly at all, and now basically we're flying too much. Okay. And so these types of technological breakthroughs can have quite transformative effects. And if you're thinking about artificial intelligence and that we want to mimic the way the brain works and so on, it's clear that this is also going to have like a deep transformative impact. So the question is, how far along to this vision are we? And very often it's overhyped, but that is kind of like the core motivation, of course. And so artificial intelligence, as I said, is kind of like a natural endpoint. So we try to understand like how do organisms work. So that might be our own organism, or it might be like animals that we're looking at. That we want to understand how do birds actually fly in order to mimic them, and so on. And so early on, people had like very mechanistic models on how animals work. Then in the 19th century, we also, people found out that electricity actually has a pretty important role to play in our kind of organisms. And so there's this very famous example by Galvani about, electricity in frogs, and you can put on like electrodes on, and then the muscles will kind of quiver a bit. And then people started analyzing brains. And so people found out that there are neurons, like the brain is made up of individual neurons and so on. And so it's kind of clear that if you're taking this apart and you look at it as a machine, you ask yourself, okay, can we build something like the brain or like a human, ourselves? And this is part of science fiction, of course, and like Frankenstein and these things. But it's like a question that seems close by for you to ask. Okay, and then in the 19th century, then we had kind of the emergence of computers. And so on the left-hand side, you see Ada Lovelace, who was basically kind of the mastermind behind the first computer and the first programmer. And on the left-hand side, you see the first program written in a programming language that is not Python. But so it's a programming language that actually runs through an algorithm to compute Bernoulli numbers. And so it's a bona fide. It's not like just a kind of addition machine and so on. But it's like an actual kind of general purpose computer. And the idea here was always to kind of build something called the analytical engine, which would be able to run these types of computer programs. And so in the end, it turned out that this was never built, but also tells you that kind of computer science and thinking about algorithms and so on, it's not necessarily connected to specifically having a computer like on your fingertips. So like there's like an entire field of theoretical computer science on thinking about like what an algorithm is and the theory of computation. And so Ada Lovelace, she basically thought about like algorithms and how to write computer programs without ever having a computer. So that's kind of interesting, and that was the 19th century. And then as history progresses, of course, the 20th century was really key in making a lot of these things work. So Alan Turing is one of the great persons in the history of computer science. He was working during the World War II on cracking the Enigma machine, which is an encryption device that the Germans used. And then he was also thinking about like what does it actually mean to have like general purpose computation. He developed the theory of computation. There are other people like Claude Shannon who was thinking about information theory and so on. And so like the mid 20th century is really kind of where things started to actually work at the first computers. And you could actually think about building something that maybe Ada Lovelace could only dream about. And so then after the war, it's clear that so you had computers, and so people started thinking about kind of what could you do with these computers. And so in the 50s, there was kind of the kickoff meeting for artificial intelligence. It's called the Dartmouth workshop. And so you can kind of see like a couple of people were coming together and they were writing a proposal for like a workshop. Back then it was only men. And so you had like a 10-man study group of artificial intelligence. And so their kind of baseline assumption was that they had a conjecture that every aspect of learning or any other type of intelligence can in principle be precisely described by a machine, and you can simulate it. So the idea is, okay, now we have computers, we can somehow program these computers to do something like break encryption, right? And so can we somehow encode like some very detailed model of intelligence into these computers? And so this is, so you see some of the kind of famous names here. So Claude Shannon, he's kind of the person that's, founded information theory, and a couple of other people. And so they kind of had like a 7-week workshop about thinking of about artificial intelligence. Okay, what's kind of interesting, already in the early 50s, they were talking about neuron nets. So not neural networks, but I mean, close enough. And so the question is, okay, can you arrange a hypothetical set of neurons? And so there was already some kind of like experimental work early on, but it's clear, it's a problem that needs more work, right? And so neural networks are a thing now, but it took 70 years to really kind of extract the power of neural networks. And so that was maybe a little bit of an understatement. But it's also kind of like a sign that these ideas are not new, which should make you ask the question, why is this happening now? So neural networks were thought of in the 50s. And so something has happened recently that actually made them, or made us kind of give a course on neural networks in the physics department. Okay, so how do people think about neural networks? Basically, they had a very kind of mechanistic ansatz. They knew about neurons and that they're kind of cells that are specialized for like electrical signals. And you have like these dendrites on the left-hand side, which are basically input nodes for electrical signals. And then you have output nodes, which is the axon. And so you have like a signal that is going through this. And the output will be activated depending on what the inputs are. And so, one thing that you can think about is whether or not you can build something like an artificial neuron, where on the left-hand side you have a number of inputs, and then you have maybe some complicated way to combine all of these inputs into a single response, right? And what these the actual biological neurons have is that they have kind of like a step function response. So there might be, these neurons might be off or they might be on, depending on what the signals are. It might be a very complicated function of the inputs, but they have kind of two different states. Are they actually propagating a signal, yes or no? And so the idea, kind of like a very simple mathematical model for this, is that you have like a weighted sum of these inputs. So you have, you see that the sum sign, each of the inputs gets a weight. We don't know a priori what these weights should be, but then you have like some overall input. You combine all of these inputs into a single number, and now you're needing to decide, okay, am I actually going to turn on this neuron? So am I propagating a signal? Yes or no? And so basically, the output is then going to be, okay, is this sum positive or is it negative? And then that gives you some understanding on whether or not the neuron would be activated, yes or no. And so this model is called the perceptron, and it's basically like a model of perception, where you kind of perceive some signals and you're processing them, and you're producing some kind of output once you've processed them. But it's a very kind of simplistic way to process information. But you can already do something quite interesting with these things. So one thing, for example, you can do is you can make predictions for linear or like pattern recognition for linearly separable patterns. So let's say you have like a two-dimensional input space. So you have x1 and x2, and so you have different types of colors. So you have like a color 1 and a color 0, so blue and green. And so what you want to do, okay, if I ask you, okay, what should the color of this point be? What should it be? So you want to have like some prediction mechanism that perceives the coordinates x1 and x2, and the output of the machine should be, okay, which color is this? And so if you think about kind of this formula, so what is this formula? It's a simple like linear combination of x1 and x2. And so what these, depending on what the weights are, what these implements are kind of just lines, right? And so you have like a linear pattern that will basically say, okay, I have some kind of input, x1, x2, depending on whether or not this is above some threshold, I will turn on the neuron, and then it will have output signal 1, or it will have output signal 0. And this is kind of like the simplest neural network you could think of, and it's called the perceptron. Okay, so then depending on what the data is, then you might want to have like different lines. And so one of the key questions in training perceptrons is how should you choose the weights? And so what we see here is that you want to maybe choose these weights based on some data that you have, because the data is clearly guiding you kind of what the right type of prediction mechanism should be. Okay, so that was already kind of early on in the 50s. So people were already thinking about neural networks. But then it's a very kind of, okay, is this like an artificial intelligence? I mean, it's a line, right? And so it's unclear that you can do anything useful with this, and or even call this, like intelligent behavior. I mean, yeah, you can do predictions, but okay, the world is not going to implode from this. But people actually tried to do things with this. So they went from kind of these theoretical understandings to like an experiment. And so Rosenblatt, who was a researcher in the US, he actually built this perceptron, and he was building like a very complicated, not like a two-dimensional example, but a 400-dimensional example. And you can think, okay, in 400 dimensions, maybe actually like a linear separation can do something interesting. And in fact, it's one of the key ideas behind what's called support vector machines, which I'll not have time to go into. But so having linear separation at very high dimension is still powerful. So people, try to build these things with 20 times 20 pixels. So you could try to do like computer vision or something like this, where you have 20 by 20 pixels that will go into a perceptron. It will give you some binary output, yes or no. And so you can do these experiments. So that was also in the late 50s, 60s. But then this started to not really work. And people kind of changed their focus on rule-based systems. And so one of the reasons why this doesn't work is because it's very easy to find examples where like a perceptron doesn't really work. And so this is a pattern where like you cannot like draw a line through this that very easily separates or makes correct predictions. And so this is what's called an XOR pattern. So you want to have like an exclusive OR where you want to kind of predict blue here when this is high and the other dimension is low, or the other way around. But this type of pattern is not something you can do with a perceptron. And so then people basically lost complete interest in neural networks, and might have also been okay, just trying to build like a neuron-based machine is maybe a little bit too ambitious. So then this started an era on kind of what's called GoFi, or good old-fashioned AI. Here the focus was really on adding knowledge that we as humans have into the machines. And so we kind of like to think that we are intelligent. And so our knowledge matters. And so we know what the rules are, and we have like some kind of mental picture of, what it means to act rationally. And so the idea is, okay, can we just infuse the machines with the knowledge that we have, and give the machine certain rules? Okay, if like there's a stop sign, it's red, stop the car. If it's green, you go, and so on. And so one of the famous examples for this is Deep Blue. And so this is like a chess playing machine. So chess was really kind of one of the key drivers for artificial intelligence, or trying to see, can you make machines do something interesting? And what's interesting with chess is that, so we tend to think that if you can do something complicated, like play chess, so for us, being very good at chess is a sign of intelligence. Whereas, and so if you build a machine that can play chess, we might think, okay, that's an intelligent machine. But then that machine, cannot, for example, walk, right? And like a baby, like any baby can walk at some point, or most of the time. And so things that we tend to think are kind of correlated with intelligence, for artificial intelligence might not be so correlated. With intelligence, you might only be able to do one very specific thing, maybe at a level that is much better than humans. But that doesn't mean that this is kind of like a general intelligence. And the reason is the correlation between, so we just associate being good at chess, that you can also probably, do math, and you can speak and so on. But for machines, these types of correlations don't exist. Okay, so then basically there was no real kind of focus on learning, but it was all about what's called expert systems and kind of infusing rules into machines. And so here you can see Garry Kasparov, who was a chess grandmaster and world champion, and he was basically trying to play against these computer machines. And for some time in the 80s, he was still winning, and at some point it was completely hopeless. And by now, nobody can beat a kind of chess engine. But these things are kind of like a good, so they had like very, very deep books and like opening theory and so on. And we basically, as humans, put in the rules on how to play chess. Okay, so then what are some problems with this good old-fashioned AI approach? And so there's two famous problems. One is called the qualification problem. Basically, if you want to have like rules, okay, if you have like this kind of initial situation, do this or that action, then it's very difficult to say, okay, will this action have the intended effect? So if I kind of stop here, will I survive because there's a red light? But it might be that there's like a car behind me is racing, and so actually maybe you should run the red light. And so being able to kind of fully specify all the preconditions that are needed in order to do some action is not possible, and the rules become more and more and more complicated. And so this is called the qualification problem. And then there's also like a frame problem, which basically is the question of how can we encode like core knowledge that we know about our environment. So I know, for example, if I kind of run against this window, I'm gonna hurt myself. and it's not going to break. But encoding this into rules, and you don't want to kind of encode rules for every type of crazy situation, and maybe things that don't happen, because things that don't happen, many things don't happen. There's no meteorite kind of coming in here, and so this is called the frame problem. And so how can we kind of have like an axiomatic understanding of our environment? And so that is also very difficult in this kind of rule-based artificial intelligence approach. And it's also not something that we, like as intelligent humans, tend to have, right? So it's not like you were born and you're given like a rule book and this is how to act, and then you suddenly are intelligent, but somehow while you're growing up, you're learning something. And so this is really then where learning comes in. And so the solution to these kind of rule-based problems is to kind of try, instead of somebody telling you the rules or hard coding certain rules, the idea is that, okay, can you replace these human provided rules with experiential data? So can you learn the rules? And this requires some data, some experience. And so the idea is, okay, can you have some data that is coming in, and you have maybe some generic meta learning algorithm on how you store information or you process the data. And what you synthesize out of this data is a learned rule on what to do. And so if we go back to this, it's also clear how we might learn. We might look at this and we might like test like a certain line. We can see how well does it do, and then we can learn, okay, it's doing badly, and so we're adjusting the parameters, and then it will learn a little bit better. And so but this requires data, right? And so this is kind of like a very basic mechanism for learning. And so this is when people talk about machine learning, it's basically about like a data-driven approach where you have data, there are no hard-coded rules, and there's a learning algorithm that just produces the rules that you're interested in. And then so machine learning, for machine learning, you basically need to kind of have like a model of the data. Somebody hands you the data, and if you want to have like a good learning algorithm, you need to know or have some assumptions on what this data is. And so a very common assumption is that it's a random or like a representative sample of the type of inputs that you might get once you're deploying this algorithm, right? So if you want to do like computer vision on like face detection and so on, probably you should like the idea is that you have like a representative samples of what possible input images could be. And so then what does it mean to have like a representative sample? It's like all about probability. It's a random subsample of like a bigger probability density of possible data sets that you might have. And so machine learning is essentially, kind of like a statistical and data-driven point of view. And that's why having some initial knowledge about statistics is important if you want to do machine learning. And so this is one of the also famous people that produced a very successful machine learning algorithm called the support vector machine, and did a lot of kind of theoretical work. And so so this is a reference to a very early computer game that you might not know, and but it's like a play on base theorem. Okay, so then so this is machine learning, and then in the late 80s, so you're noticing, so we have like computers, and then neural networks become a thing, and then people lose interest, and then there was a kind of reawakening in the late 80s because people figured out, okay, what could a good learning algorithm be? And this is called gradient descent, and it's something we're going to discuss also in this lecture. It's basically this idea, okay, if you're sitting on an algorithm and you can evaluate how good it's doing on the data that you have, then you can kind of move locally into a direction where the algorithm becomes a little bit better. And so this is called gradient descent. And then the algorithm for efficiently doing gradient descent is backpropagation. This is going to be an entire lecture here. And then this is Jeff Hinton, who was one of the, not the person that invented backpropagation, but the person that popularized it. There's also an interesting, so then we also had like some early successes. So character recognition, so having like vision systems was a big topic early on, or still a big topic, because this is also the way that we process information as human. The most bits of information do not come over sound to us, if you're speaking over natural language, but most of the information that we're processing is over our visual kind of input, which is the eyes. And so computer vision is a very big driver of a lot of the recent success. And so you have, for example, character recognition systems, and you have something like this, where you can see that the answer, as you're kind of showing the algorithm different images, the answer is changing from 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5. And so you see, okay, somehow it is actually doing something useful. And this was one of the first deployed neural networks that was used to scan checks in order at a bank, because this is something that you still do in the US. Okay, so then there's also a connection to your university. So one of the key kind of like the breakthroughs was to have neural networks that also have like some kind of internal sense of memory. And so these are called LSTMs, or recurrent neural networks. We're also going to talk about them. And so these were developed here in Munich by Jürgen Schmidt-Huber and Sepp Hochreiter. And so you can see that there's lots of stuff kind of happening around you that you might not notice, and maybe in 30 years something amazing is going to be happening here. Okay, so any questions in the meantime? No? Okay. All right, so then let's go a bit further in the history. So we have the 1990s now. We had some early successes. We have like character recognition, we have neural networks with memory and so on, but then neural networks fell out of fashion again. So it's like a constant like boom and bust cycle where people think, okay, finally we can like program a brain, but then it turns out, okay, it's not going to work. And it's just the problem is, okay, like this idea of having like a data-driven assumption, this connectionist idea that you have very simple modules that have like this simple like thresholding function and so on. That's very attractive, but it turns out you need a lot of data, and so we just didn't have a lot of data back then. And so that was kind of like the era of classic machine learning for what we today would maybe call small data sets or medium-sized data sets. So support vector machine, which Vapnik was one of the key people, principal component analysis, nearest neighbor searches, and so on. And so these are all techniques that are being discussed in the essential machine learning course, and they're kind of like the precursor to the current kind of modern phase of machine learning. Okay, and then we had a breakthrough in 2012. And so when I think about 2012, I think about a breakthrough moment that we discovered the Higgs boson. It was also something that people, like artificial intelligence, started to think about in the 50s and 60s. And it took a long time for it to work. And so on the left-hand side, you can see, so this is the plot. You can see like a little bump in blue. And so the fact that these black dots here, they kind of track the red histogram a bit. But here they stop tracking the red histogram, and there's a little bit of a bump. And so this is what's triggered the discovery of the Higgs boson. And so that was very exciting. And you have like articles in the New York Times. And so, you might think, okay, this was the biggest thing that happened in 2012. As a physicist, I would agree. But then over in the computer science department, there was also something pretty deep happening. And it's you also have New York Times articles. Scientists see promise in deep learning programs. Right, and so this is widely referred as the AlexNet moment. It's the first time that neural networks really consistently outperformed standard machine learning techniques like support vector machines on large data sets. And so again, like one of the key benchmarks was computer vision. So the idea is, so we kind of graduated from like simple numbers, which are 28 pixels by 28 pixels, to more complicated photographs, right? And the question is, okay, what do you see here? And now it's kind of moving in a direction where you think, okay, this might be something that resembles intelligence, or at least like pattern recognition and so on. And so you can basically give it any type of image, and it has like 1,000 possible answers, and it will tell you something about, is it like a motor scooter or a leopard or something like this. And so this was really kind of like a shot heard around the world, or the beginning of what's called the deep learning revolution, where things really started to take off. And so that's, to me, as a particle physicist, it's kind of interesting that these things happened almost within a week of each other. Okay, so then deep learning started, just to make sure that you understand that this is a thing. So this is the number of machine learning publications on the internet, and you can see it's really kind of like a crazy growth. Whether or not, I mean, so I'll have a different plot to show that it's actually like a discontinuity. Here you might think, okay, it's just an exponential growth, and it just looks amazing, from any point that you're looking at. But it's really kind of this pace of machine learning research and the pace of innovation is very, very high, and it's very difficult to keep track. So why? So then, you might ask yourself, okay, why is it happening now? So what is really kind of what enabled these neural networks? Because neural networks, the idea kind of goes back to the 1950s, and so why is it now? And so one of the key aspects is not really that like the theory changed or the idea changed, but just that the data sets that you use to train these neural networks became sufficiently large. And so this is to a large degree because there's an explosion in digital data in the world. And we can go back to the World Wide Web, which was invented at CERN. And so here on the here you see the first photo on the World Wide Web, which was the kind of one of the bands, music bands that we have at CERN. So that was in the early 90s, so this was like a single photo on the World Wide Web, and now we have like very large scale data sets of image data. And so ImageNet was one of the competitions that they had in 2010 to see, okay, do these very large scale data sets really make a difference in terms of machine learning? And it turns out that for neural networks, it really makes a difference, that you need to have sufficiently large data for these things to work. Okay, so the data is one important aspect, and the different important aspect is, okay, you have a lot of data, and so you need to process all of this data through some kind of algorithm. And so you're in a situation where you have one algorithm and many instances of the same type of data. And so it's something that you can massively parallelize. You can somehow give one processor one image, and then you can kind of do like a very parallel computation. And so it turns out something that people figured out kind of in 2005 or so is that you can use graphics cards, which normally were only used to render your computer display or your a computer game and so on, that you can use them for general purpose computation. It used to be that you had like a split in terms of you have your computer, like your CPU in your computer for general purpose computation, and then maybe you have like a graphics driver just to kind of make the display run. And this was not like a general purpose kind of computer, but it's just like a graphics specific hard-coded type of processor. And so that was all about like shading and rendering and so on. But 15 years ago, people figured out, okay, you can use graphics cards as general purpose machines, and they're particularly good for parallel processing. You can kind of think about, you have also more or less independent pixels that you're trying to independently process. And so a lot of the graphics card companies completely transitioned into machine learning first type of companies. So NVIDIA, it might also build a graphics card in your laptop, but like a very large fraction of their income is now driven by machine learning research. And the graphics card that you use for machine learning are different graphics cards than you use for just rendering. Okay, so that was also a very big point. And so there are like multiple things that came together in order to make deep learning, or like this phase transition in machine learning really happen 10 years ago. Okay, here, this is what I promised, that this is kind of like really a phase transition. So this is kind of the complexity of machine learning systems over time. So on the x-axis, you have like the 50s, the perceptron and so on. And then you have kind of recent history, and you can see around 2010, 2012, there was like a very kind of strong discontinuity. And notice that this is like an exponential scale, right? And so this is a big change, and it's very noticeable that the field of machine learning was completely overrun by deep learning, and entire like fields like computer vision, which had before more like a kind of rule-based approach, or maybe like some machine learning based approach which is not neural network based, they completely transition to deep neural networks, and all the things that you kind of use today are likely deep learning systems. Okay, so we just kind of went through like some kind of history on like artificial intelligence and machine learning. So as I started out, artificial intelligence, machine learning, deep learning, they're all kind of intermingled in popular media if you're reading about this in the news. And it's really important to know the difference so that you're kind of have your terminology correct. And so what is the difference? There's also statistics, what's the difference between statistics and machine learning? And so there's this nice definition. So the difference between machine learning and AI is if it's written in Python, it's probably machine learning. And if it's like some executive trying to sell their company, it's probably artificial intelligence. So that's pretty close to the truth. There's also this version where you take statistics, you put like a nice frame around it called machine learning. And if you have an audience, you'll call it artificial intelligence. Okay, so maybe funny, maybe not funny, but so the kind of what I want you to understand is basically, okay, artificial intelligence is like the general system idea of having like machines do something interesting for us. Can we make computers act in an intelligent way? So that might be rules, it might not even be based on data. Maybe they just kind of have like some innate ability or something like this. And then machine learning is really like one particular approach to AI that uses data to generate intelligent algorithms. And then deep learning is a subset of machine learning that really aims to have complex pipeline and work on low-level data. So what this exactly means and why, what differentiates deep learning from standard machine learning and maybe deep neural networks from shallow neural networks. So this is something we'll discuss in the next lecture, but it's all about kind of very complicated, long computation that is all driven by neural networks. Okay, so then let me see how I am with time. Okay, we have a bit of time. So I'll just kind of walk through a few recent successes. So you might also have seen some in the news. And so as I said, so computer vision is really a field that was completely taken over by deep neural networks. There's no way to do computer vision today without using deep neural networks. And you can see that it's fairly complex stuff that is happening where you can kind of classify every single pixel in the image to what object it belongs, right? It might belong to a bicycle, might belong to a person. And so you have like a very detailed outline, you know what the position is, you have very detailed kind of prediction power on, what the confidence is of the score of whether or not it's a person or a bicycle or a kid and so on. And so computer vision is, because it started with this AlexNet moment, is really one of the kind of key drivers for kind of the deep learning revolution. Then this is also something that you might use in your day-to-day life. Who has used DeepL in their life? Okay, so this is all deep. I mean, the reason it's deep is because it's a deep neural network. And so I also use it, it's great. So this is text-to-text generation. So you have like input text and it will just generate output text stochastically. There's also, so as I said, it's a very active field right now. So this is from 2 days ago, where instead of doing text-to-text translation from English text to German text or the other way around, it's actually the problem, not a lot of languages don't have like a writing system. And so the question is, okay, can you translate speech to speech? And so this is something also from Meta.
你好 Ann. Hello Ann. 我希望有一天，我的查囝甲伊阿嬷会当使用这项科技，用因上关系的语言讲话。
I hope one day my daughter and her grandmother can use this technology to speak with their most used language.
That would be great. I'm sure her grandmother would be very happy.
Okay, so a lot of these big technology companies have big AI labs. It's a little bit similar to the 20th century, where you have like telephone companies driving a lot of fundamental physics research, even like Bell Labs and so on. And so this is just from 2 days ago. And then, so this is also was in the news a lot recently, text-to-image generation. And, can you have like creative things going on. And so here it's basically you have text and then it produces a very high resolution image and you can put in whatever you want. And then either it succeeds or not. Who has tried this out themselves? Okay, so it's kind of amazing that this is really in the hands of everybody. You just go onto a website and you put something in and then maybe something happens or it doesn't happen. And so you'll build in this course generative models that kind of have the same mechanisms, but of course it's all about the scale. So the ideas might be simple, but then the effects can be pretty profound. And so you'll not be able to build this because this requires a few $1 million of GPUs, but you'll actually code like a generative model to generate new data from nothing, basically. Okay, then there's also the other direction. So you can also go from image to text. So this is called captioning. And so you can give this machine learning system like an input image, and it will kind of initialize a chatbot, and you can chat with the chatbot about the image. And so you can chat, okay, and it will tell you, okay, this is a picture of Barack Obama. You can say, okay, where's his foot? And then the machine learning system will reply to you. The foot is positioned on the right-hand side of the scale. And then, you can ask, okay, what's the effect of the scale? And it will tell you, okay, the scale shows a high weight, and you can continue this discussion. Okay, why are people laughing? Or is this why people are laughing? We'll tell you yes, and so on. And so this starts kind of to feel like a little bit in an uncanny valley. Like, is this actually, like intelligent or whatever? So I'll have like some examples that might answer this question. Okay, so then also games are like a big, so this is in the history or like in the tradition of trying to learn chess. Chess in the 90s was completely, okay, chess is solved for a computer. You'll never be able to reach as a human the computer level again. And then people thought, okay, the next, so Go as a game is much more complicated. So exponentially more complicated than chess. And so people thought, okay, this is very far away to have a computer play chess. And in fact, like having a rule-based system for Go was not possible, but kind of this a combination of rule-based system and deep learning, produced AlphaGo. And so now you're also in Go at a level where you can beat grandmasters in Go. You can also have like multiplayer games, which are much more complicated because you need to associate, like if you're a gamer, you know that you're talking to your friends. And so you need to associate or like coordinate with people, like what your strategy is. And so it turns out that kind of state-of-the-art machine learning systems can also do multiplayer games. Okay, and then of course, the reason why we're talking about this is because it has like a very big effect on science. And so for particle physics, it's obvious because you have a lot of data, and it's, as I said, it's really like kind of like a nice playground for scientific applications. So one of the really big breakthroughs recently. So you'll notice this is September 2022. And so all of this stuff is super recent, right? And so now AlphaFold is basically trying to use the same type of machinery that was used to play Go and apply this to protein folding, which is one of the key ways to understand, how, for example, viruses work. So like the coronavirus, like these spike proteins, they fold in a certain way, and then depending on how they fold, they might, be able to attach to you, and then, you get sick or you don't. And so scientific applications are like a big driver, and so that's also why I'm interested in it, and so on. Okay, so that sounds very impressive. You might say, okay, the end is nigh. Okay, the robots are going to take over the world. But actually, if you look more closely, it's also similar to chess. So it's very good at certain things, but then it's also very, very bad at other things, and it's very far away from like intelligent behavior. And so one of the recent examples that I produced a couple of days ago, so I was talking to like Stable Diffusion. I would say, okay, give me a salmon in the river and produce this, right? Okay, I mean, so you can kind of understand how this is happening, but it's also, okay, yeah. So then there's also things like adversarial examples. So you can really fool AIs in like pretty easy ways, where you can like just put like a sticker on the Apple, will tell you it's an iPod. I don't know if anybody knows what an iPod is anymore. They don't exist. Okay, it used to be like an MP3 player. There's also like you can just it's also a bit disturbing. You can have like an image and you put on noise on it, and it's like to you it's an imperceptible difference. So in your like brain will not classify the left image differently than the right image, but the machine learning system will switch its classification from dog to red wine. Okay, and so there are lots of things that are just not working, and the kind of recent successes of deep learning, they're really fooling us in a very certain narrow definition of intelligence, and we are very, very far away from what people thought about like artificial general intelligence, and so that's why my recommendation would be to not necessarily talk about AI unless you're trying to sell something. And more talk about maybe machine learning and so on, and really kind of keep the hype down. But it's still very, very impressive. So this is not to kind of say that these things are not impressive. It's amazing, and the progress is really quick. There are lots of things that are happening that's in a very quick succession. So one of the things that is happening now, for example, I didn't put this into the slide, is that you have video generation. You go from text to video. And you might not be so far away that you have basically like a script that you have, that like a screenwriter might write, and it will just generate a video. And so you can right now generate like 15-second videos, but this is going to progress pretty quickly. And let's see where we are with this at the end of the course. So like these models, like diffusion models, so the model that is behind this, like 10 months ago, nobody used them. Okay, that's a bit crazy. Okay, so then, so where were we? So failure. So then, one of the one important aspect is really kind of bias and ethics. It's really being data driven is nice because you're kind of learn from experience, but it also makes you susceptible to, if you have like the very selective kind of experience, your decision making is going to be bad. And so one famous example is that computer vision algorithms are, bad at, for example, recognizing people with darker skin, or you have things like deepfakes and so on. And this really raises a lot of things. You also have these text generation systems, about plagiarism, and is this actually, so this is being trained on a lot of like art that actual artists produce, right? And so what is like the ethical way to do these things? And so these questions are not very easy, and so it's good to think about deeply about this. And scientific application is also relevant. So, for example, if you're in drug discovery, it's a very important question. For me, for particle physics, we tend to think that it's not so important. But also, if you do machine learning in kind of your in your studies, and you might even work on something that is a little bit not so controversial, you might at some point like go out into the world and work for a company that uses machine learning for some non-scientific application. And so you should also think about these topics in a kind of serious way. Okay, then there are things about nonsense reasoning. So I was advertising how smart this thing is, but then you can kind of ask how many giraffes are there. We'll tell you that there are 2 giraffes. Also crazy. And so it's really not clear whether or not these things are intelligent or not, or whether or not they're fooling you into thinking they're intelligent. And then there's also a question about interpretability. And so everybody has a phone here, and you're taking a picture, you're trying to focus the image, and it will like draw these little boxes, and you're like, okay, great, it found the faces. Like you don't really care why it found the faces, right? So whatever. It found it makes the picture sharp, and so great. So you have a machine learning system that operates on a lot of sensor data and produces something. Okay, excellent. But then, to me as a particle physicist, it might be that we might have a system that takes in like all these 100 million signals we have from a particle physics collision. Will tell me, okay, this was a haze. Okay, well, what am I going to do with this type of information? Like, okay, am I believing this algorithm? Yes or no? And like, as scientists, you usually want to understand why like a certain answer was produced. And so these things are not very easy to say. On a very mechanistic level, it's very easy to say why the neural network was arrived at the decision. Because if you go back to like this type of thing, so neural network is more like a more complicated version of this. And so you can say, okay, why does it predict, that this point is blue? It's very obvious because the weights are the way it is, right? And so because of the weights, that's the reason. But this is not like a kind of operational type of explanation that really tells you something. So I mean, it's obvious why the result is being produced, but this is usually not the language in which we want to have these types of explanations. Okay, so then so I think interpretability is key, especially for a scientific application. And so I think with this I'm going to close. And so what is the state of the AI today? So we went a bit over the history. So the dominant approach to AI is artificial intelligence, is machine learning. And really the last 10 years were kind of like a time of incredible expansion. It's called the deep learning revolution and has really brought a lot of great progress. There are lots of issues that remain, especially in relation to scientific applications. So hopefully in this lecture, we will be able to discuss some of these things. Okay, thank you. Are there any questions? Yeah.
You talked about
The what?
About the quantity of data needed for
Yeah.
learning, but what about the variability of data?
Right.
So for image, different kind of situations.
Yeah. Yeah, no, so this is exactly kind of what's the problem with these types of things. So like if you only show white faces to a computer vision algorithm, and it will only be able to recognize white faces. So the assumption, so we'll discuss this in the next lecture. So the assumption is that the data that the algorithm will see in the real world after it's trained comes from the same distribution as the data that it was trained on. And so if it's you're going to show like varied data to the algorithm, you should also use varied data to train it. And so that, of course, increases exponentially the amount of data you need, because you need to cover all bases. And it's really one of the problems with like autonomous driving, where like some of these kind of edge cases just don't happen very often. And, it's a problem, and then the algorithm doesn't know what to do. Yeah. Any other questions? Okay, if not, then see the few of you who want to do the tutorials on Monday. Otherwise, see you on Friday. Bye-bye.